It's me, Kayla Engeman, your fantasy girl, here to take you on my fantasy football journey this season as I try to win my league and prove that no one knows anything at all whatsoever about this game like they pretend to, and appearing so is just say it with me, fantasy. I started my fantasy football journey back in 2019. I had just moved to New York City, and all of my guy friends were in a group chat that they would not let me in. They said no girls allowed. I said, I will do anything to get into this chat because they made all of their plans in this chat. And as we know about boys, they don't tell anybody what the plans are until basically they're already happening. I was sick of finding out these plans so late. So I was like, I will do anything to get ahead of this. And they said, yeah, like what? I said, I know. Let me in your fantasy football league. If I win, I get in the chat. They're like, okay, sure. I didn't know anything about fantasy football. I was starting from absolute scratch. So I asked everybody I knew that liked football anything about fantasy. One of my coworkers in particular, shout out to you, Kevin. We talked about fantasy football all summer long. And he told me one name over and over again. You have to get Patrick Mahomes. This was in 2019. So then I found out that the same day as the draft, I was going to be in Aruba with my family overseas in a hotel that had really horrible Wi-Fi. So I was like, Kevin, you got to draft for me. And he did. And I'll never forget getting back to my hotel room and getting the text that said, I got you Patrick Mahomes. If this had happened in a reverse world where I was in the league and someone else had their coworker draft for them, I would raise hell. This is not allowed. But I didn't know any better, and I don't think that I told anybody until like a couple years later. But that year I came in fourth. I have gotten nowhere near fourth since then. And it's driving me crazy because I want to be able to prove that I can do this on my own. So every year when I play fantasy football, the same thing happens. Every week I look at my lineup, and every week I get these gut feelings of like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. He's going to be my running back one. He's going to be my wide receiver. I'm going to flex this guy. I'm going to bench this guy. I'll teach you what all those things mean later. And then I ask all of my friends for advice. My therapist calls this crowdsourcing. I ask coworkers, family, friends. Once I asked an Uber driver. I asked an Uber driver to help me set my lineup as I was being carted back to my house at like 2:00 in the morning. And he actually had great advice. He said, you know what you're doing wrong. You're chasing last week's points. We'll get into that. But as you can see, I have no limits when it comes to crowdsourcing, and I don't trust myself at all. So every year, I love playing fantasy because I'm so competitive, but also it teaches me how to trust myself. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it helps me to be like, damn, I was right. It's results in real time. At the end of each week, when I look at my scores and I look at how the players I was going to put in did and how they would have killed, and how the players that I put in because my damn coworker, Jesse, he'll be on an episode later, he told me that I should bench that guy. I need to learn to trust my gut. And I need to learn to stop crowdsourcing. And I need to learn that nobody has any answers that are always going to be right. There's no system to life. You just have to make the best decisions that you think are good for you. And I know this is so cheesy, but this is truly one of the reasons I love fantasy football for myself. So, our first guest is my good friend. I've known him forever, Eric Ziwak. He's a great first guest because number one, he's in my league. Number two, he is the quintessential football bro. This is the guy who's always watching the game, either out of the corner of his eye at a bar or directly in front of the TV all day on Sunday. He knows every stat, every player, every piece of history about each team and who was on what and who coaches where. This man is an almanac. And so I need to get inside his head because every year Eric does very, very well. And I don't. And I need to know, is there a system with the draft? Because you'll see if you're in a league, the league is made in the draft. If you draft well, you will have a good season. Also, you should know that this year in our league, we voted on the punishment. And every year we vote on the punishment. This year, it is one person, whoever loses, has to do the beer mile. That is where you run a quarter mile, chug a beer, run another quarter mile, chug a beer, until you're done with the mile. Some of my friends did this a couple years ago for fun as a competition, and so many of them threw up. It is an absolute inevitable vomit. So I absolutely cannot lose. You should also know that in the playoffs, there is a winner's bracket and there's a loser's bracket. In the winner's bracket, the people who are at the top go against each other, like a normal bracket. In the loser's bracket, we determined that the loser is the person who loses the loser's bracket. And if you are that person, you have to run a solo beer mile, and that cannot happen. So I have to draft well. So without further ado, let's get this fucking guy on here. So we have Alie, our co-producer. We have Eric Ziwak, our very first guest. Welcome to the both of you. Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to be here and talk about fantasy and delusions.
That's a much better name for this podcast. Okay, Eric. I don't know how every year you do so well. It actually really bothers me. I've tried so hard to just have a different strategy every year, and I've concluded that since none of my strategies work, that it's just vibes. There is no way to actually do this. So do you have a tried and true strategy you use every single year for the draft? How do you go about this?
Yeah, I mean, vibes is really key, especially, it's all luck majority of the time. But for me personally, being a massive football fan and knowing the sport and knowing pretty much all the teams, majority, really helps. And for myself, knowing football and the NFL and watch all the off season, focus on training camp, especially with my team, or watching the NFL draft, that really matters because in those, when you're doing your fantasy draft, especially in those late rounds, it's always good and fun to take sometimes a risk on a rookie, being, rookie quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, because you never know. You could have lightning in a bottle. And if you're in a keeper league and you get this guy in a late round, then boom, you have this guy set for, depending on how your league works, for a couple of years, and you're set for that position.
Clarify, our league is not a keeper league. So correct. That changes the strategy. Oh my God, the draft strategy. But I'm going to call bullshit on you because it sounds like you do a lot of studying. That doesn't sound very vibey to me.
No, it's not really studying. It's something I enjoy. So that's why it's like a vibe. Like I always say, people ask, what are stress relievers for me? And I'm like, well, the things I enjoy. And the football is one of them, And that's from listening to podcasts about my team, things like that. I don't go heavy and there's no point of reading those magazines and stuff like that. They're helpful guides, to see the order. Don't get me wrong, I'll look at my top 100 list players and be like, okay, oh yeah, that's right, this guy's on this team. Looking at the depth chart of that team and seeing, okay, they'll fit. So yes, to your point, is it a vibe-ish? Yes, but no at the same time. But for me, it's a vibe because I love it.
Let's get down to brass tacks. Give me your top 3 guidelines for a successful draft. I'm talking positions, strategy, cue. Talk me through the whole kit and the whole caboodle.
Yeah, great question. And there's no really mystery to the magic. It's a lot of it is, like I mentioned before, is luck. But at the same time, you want to establish and make sure to get, first of all, with your first pick, a ready, steady, solid player who could produce and average you over, hopefully, depending on your league, let's say over 20 points a game, right? So a lot of times that could be from top wide receivers, a la Justin Jefferson or a top running back like Jonathan Taylor, right? So knowing that goes for sure, like you're almost guaranteed to get that many points week to week, and that could go greatly. So once you establish getting one of those guys, of course you want them to stay healthy, and they stay healthy, great. Depending on my position, I may go best player available. So like where I'm picking in the 9th pick, I'm planning on looking at players that whoever maybe hasn't been taken and I feel has fallen, I'll take them. Or I may take a risk on a player to say, you know what, they have a high ceiling and they might be worth going for. So if I get them, I'm feeling confident in myself and quote unquote guaranteeing that they'll get those points. And then throughout the draft, they'll be like, okay, if I want a wide receiver first, I think it's time for me to, depending who's on the board left, to get one of the top running backs if they're still available. If I had Justin Jefferson at the first pick, right, I know I'm good with my number one. But when it wraps around back to me, I know my picks are going to be a little slim. So I may look, okay, who's available at running back still? So let's say, we maybe Breece Hall is there, right, because of his injury concerns. And I may take him because that's worth the risk, I feel. It's second year, had an amazing season. But if not, maybe let's say another top wide receiver, let's say Waddle's there coming back to me. I may be like, screw it. You're telling me if I get Justin Jefferson and Jalen Waddle as my 1-2 wide receivers, I could be getting 40 points with both of them. So think of it that way. Like the year I went undefeated, I had Justin Jefferson late. I got him because he was a young guy. I think he was a rookie. I think I took a risk. I think him, Jamar Chase, both I expected high ceilings for. They were both rookies or young players. And because of that, they both helped me for the league. And you look a couple years later now, they're considered the number 1, number 2 pick in fantasy football. So it's all about the draft order, but also taking those risks could take you a long way.
So there's no one position you should be gunning for. Like at the end of the draft, make sure you have 2 really solid running backs as opposed to 2 really solid wide receivers. Because one year my strategy was to get the best quarterback, the best tight end, and let everybody else get worse tight ends, worse quarterbacks. But then I got really bad running backs and wide receivers, and that kind of bit me.
Yeah. See, the tight end position is tricky. There's only maybe a handful or less tight ends that are worth taking that high. One being like Travis Kelce. Kittle is up there as well as one of the top guys. But at the same time, you could still get reliable tight ends later. I don't focus heavily on them. I'd rather prioritize getting the wide receiver set, getting my running back set, and even quarterback too. It's great having a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen, of course. And if they fall into my lap, I'm probably going to take one. For me personally, I probably won't take a quarterback in the first 2 rounds because where I'm positioning, there's too many good players. So if I come around and I get Tyreek Hill at number 9 and another crazy good player on the wrap, then for me, it's I'll wait till quarterback later. For me, I look at that because you have to always think of who's going to get you most points. And yes, those quarterbacks could get you most points, but you have to think of when you get those interceptions, or if it's a league that allows sacks, you could be losing more and more points one by one. So it gets a little more frustrating. So that's how I look mentality with quarterbacks and tight ends. Yes, they are important. If you get a top one, go for it. If the board looks right, so meaning not the greatest running backs at this position in the draft or wide receivers. So it's okay, I'll take Josh Allen here. This is the time to take him. Or even this is time to take Travis Kelce or Kittle.
Do you believe in stacking or handcuffing or any of these little tips and tricks to get more points per week?
Yeah, I do agree with doing the little tips, especially especially handcuffing.
Tell me more about handcuffing.
Thank you.
It's not what you think, or is it? No. Handcuffing is essentially, you have to think of, by position, right? For example, when Dalvin Cook was on the Vikings, that team was a popular handcuff because Dalvin Cook would get injured a decent amount. So what people would like to do, you may draft or a little earlier than expected for a backup running back to handcuff would be like Alexander Madison, who is the other running back for the Vikings. Just in case Dalvin Cook gets hurt, which he does a decent amount, unfortunately, I have his backup. So knowing how the team runs their offense and knowing how much they like running the ball, then boom, you could go ahead and you have your replacement and you're going to be averaging the same points the same way. So that's what like handcuffing is. You could do it with quarterbacks too, but it's not as common. Wide receiver, you could. It's more heavily with the running backs because you have to think there's way more starting wide receivers and running backs in the league. So
now my plan is to stack, not to give my whole spiel away. I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes in the first round, and I'm going to try to take Travis Kelce immediately after. So I know that that's a good stack. Are there any other stacks in the event that this plan doesn't work out, which manifesting that it will? Any good stacks that you recommend?
Yeah, stacking is great, but it also could be make or break too, depending who your players are. Like for example, I had one year Derek Carr as my quarterback, and I had like I think Darren Waller, and at the same time, I'm a Carr advocate, and I love Darren Waller, but the thing is, you kind of live and die by them. You know what I mean? So essentially, if he's having a crappy game, then he's not going to get in the points. So then you're like losing both sides of the same coin, essentially. But guys like Patrick Mahomes and Kelce is a great option. Guys like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are a great option. Guys like, even if, like I said, like you want to get a quarterback later in the draft, if you have Justin Jefferson and you stack your team with other players and you're like, all right, I got Kirk Cousins, not the worst, not the best, but at the same time, you're stacked your quarterback and your wide receiver, but because it's Kirk Cousins, you got him later in the draft, essentially making sure you patent your whole roster with better players. Because you waited on quarterback, you now have a much better running back and a much better number 2 wide receiver. It's very strategic, but it could really blow up in your face too. Or it could win you. It could win your stuff.
Am I wrong to say that it sounds like your strategy is to remain flexible and constantly reevaluate the value of the players falling to you and who's currently on your roster, rather than me going in with a list of bodies that I want?
100%. You know, anything could happen. There could be a run on wide receivers. There could be a run on running backs. You know, I've seen a surprising quarterback or a surprising tight end might go way early than expected, making it like, so you drop this guy in my lap, thank you, you know, kind of deal.
So, Eric, one final question. How
Sure.
the hell do I prep now that you've given me 1,000 ways to die?
That's good and very sad and depressing. I'm sorry. Essentially, the best vibes for you, you know, go in with an open mind. Yeah, you have some guys you're thinking of, but play the board. Like you have the snake, which is great, which is helpful. Look at mocks if you want, just to get yourself, help you get into that mindset of where guys could fall. And just go with it. Go with the flow and then ride the draft. Don't get too stressed. You know, I think the strategy is like once you pick, get ready to think about the guys you're thinking afterwards. So that guy is done. What's next I need? And also, please, I'm also an advocate. Don't draft a defense or kicker that high. That's my take. I like playing defense week to week if necessary, unless this is a great defense. But keep that in mind going forward. But yeah, that's what I gotta say.
I disagree. If I have the Steelers or the Ravens, I'm sitting pretty. I have to do nothing when it comes to defense week to week.
But let me say, if you took one of those guys, but there was a really good like wide receiver, like wouldn't it be possible if like T. Higgins is there, who's the number 2 for the Bengals, and you're going to take a defense over him, it's better to take the player because one, it adds value to your depth, and if you could swap them out with your team, And two, it makes you, it could be trade bait. You could look at it as like, well, I am weak at running back. I do have T. Higgins. If I float him and this guy, I can maybe get someone better. So just always got to think.
Alie, do me a favor. Next time you record, stop wearing glasses because I can see the tabs coming up like wildfire in the reflection of your glasses.
I know that last answer, Eric, you gave me like 2 more tabs.
Oh boy. Well, if you have questions,
sweating.
happy to help.
Yeah, we have to end this here because I feel like I'm losing the league as I get more information in front of Alie. So, our co-producer of this show is a one Miss Alie Coolidge. She is in our league. She has the number 1 pick of the draft this year. It's her second time in this league with the boys, and she believes in numbers, whereas I believe in magic. And so I am thrilled to have her introduce herself and tell us all about her fantasy journey, as she will be accompanying us on this magical mystery ride all season. Welcome, Alie.
Thank you so much. Where to begin? Fantasy journey this year. I won a chocolate chip cookie contest for that sweet, sweet number 1. I've listened to Eric's great pointers. I have so many tabs open. Ugh. My first year ever doing fantasy, it was a very casual league with all of our girlfriends, and I fucked up in a lot of ways. One being I was fucking around like, oh, what's auto draft? What does that do? Next thing I knew, it had picked me a defense for my first pick of the draft. Oh, and I was 12th, or I was last, however many people we had. And so it gave me like 2 back-to-back picks. And I really had to just like salvage the rest of the draft, the rest of the season. But I did win that season. Last year, the training wheels were off, but we were wobbling, did okay, was winner of the losers bracket. And now this year is my year. I know more about how it works. I wouldn't say I know how it works, fantasy football in general, because say it with us, it's a fantasy. But you are right. I do like numbers a lot. I like to look at the stats and the projections. I love a spreadsheet. I'm going to be rocking with all my tabs, my multiple monitors, my peace and quiet on draft day.
I've never been more scared of math in my entire life.
I mean, I think math can take you only so far in fantasy because, again, it's fantasy. These are human beings. You never know when someone's going to eat something a little funky and have a bad Sunday. You don't know who's got like personal drama going on. Maybe their head's not in the game. So you can't totally rely on the math. Any given Sunday. That's why they say any given Sunday.
So why is it important to you to either be in this league or win it?
It's just fun. I just like winning, like competing. I like an irreverent take on something that a lot of guys take so seriously, and just coming in and being silly about it.
Part of this for me is also beating the 9 boys in the league. Wait, yes, there's 3 women, 9 boys.
That's like almost comparable to Congress, I think.
Now I have to win.
Exactly. We need to be the Nancy Pelosi's, just coming in there, gaveling, laying down the law.
I'm really excited for this part of the podcast because this section each week, we're going to call the person we interviewed the week before and yell at them. So, Eric, if you gave me shitty draft advice, you're going to hear it.
I can't wait. Wonderful.
Classic, man.
You won't listen to me anyways. You'll do your own thing. So that's like the thing.
Isn't that good, though, that I follow the beat of my own drum to
It is
12th
good.
place?
I could like say like, or anybody could be like, yeah, that I wouldn't have done that. And then we look back and we're like, oh, you had the right pick all along. We were the stupid ones. So there you go.
That is all I want.
I think 12th place is good, though. It's
very good.
Like, you get 2 back-to-back picks.
I meant 12th place as in loser of the losers bracket.
Oh, that won't happen.
No.
You just said anything could happen.
Anything could happen. That's true, but I really don't think you're gonna lose.
You're a much better player, Kayla, than you think you are. You've done really well year over year. Like and same with Alie. Like she had a comeback year last year in the losers bracket. It just takes just keep doing it every year, and you get used to it, and you get to know.
Bust my buttons. What a compliment. What's your plan as number one pick? Are you even gonna zhuzh it, or do you know going in?
Maybe Eric can help me with this. So I obviously everything, all the blogs, the lists, the dudes who are paid to think about these things, everyone's saying Justin Jefferson. Like he's super elite, he's great, you got to get him. You can't not pick him for number one. So I feel like I got to do that, because then if I don't, everyone's going to be like, you didn't pick the best person, like blah blah blah. And so it's like you kind of can't not. But that being said, how much should you be looking at the team as a whole? Because when I hear Justin Jefferson and the Vikings, I'm like, are the Vikings even good? And again, I'm coming from a lifetime as a Patriots fan, so like I'm used to winning. This is my like super New England centric view of fantasy football.
So there's the thing where there's certain players that could do it all for any team, no matter who's the quarterback, who's a team. They could be the worst team in the league and they'll still be dominant. You know, guys like Justin Jefferson, for example, he is a guy that he's a difference maker on the field. Any quarterback could throw him the ball and he'll catch it. Was it last year, 2 years ago? Kirk Cousins was in and out, but it didn't really affect him that much. You know, the backup came in, did his job, and he caught the ball, dominated. Guys like Tyreek Hill, like he could do that with anybody, even though they have good quarterbacks. Those guys are difference makers. It does matter when you go for a team, especially if you want to stack. I think that's the key. If you want to stack, that's where the team could matter, because one could be more of a weaker link than the other.
That's I can close like one tab after that answer. Thank you for that. When you're doing your draft, how many spreadsheets do you have? How many tabs? How many lists? How many things are you looking at per decision? Because I mean, you only got like 2 minutes per pick, so you gotta be able to make some quick choices. But now you got me thinking about depth charts, and I'm like, fuck, am I gonna have to like look up the stats of like every player on every team for every decision? That's where I'm like, I love numbers and I love the math, but like, I know there are people who do that. Help me. How many windows should I have?
Honestly, I kind of simplify. I usually just have one, or I'm old school and I print it out and I'll cross the names as they go. But don't be freaking out too much about depth chart. Main guys, you never have to worry about. You never have to worry about your quarterback. You never really have to worry about your running back, and your wide receivers. Don't really.
How I approach the draft each year is I think about the names that I remember hearing in the broadcast over and over again. Like, and there goes Kittle with blah, blah, blah. And so then I write his name down.
Yep. I use a little bit of that strategy myself.
I am not changing anything about my strategy after this call. I am doing exactly what I was planning on doing before I even logged on.
And I respect you for it.
That's why I'm going to lose. Well, the best part of fantasy football, and almost the worst, is rapidly dwindling down. The part where nobody has any bragging rights, nobody's winning, nobody's losing. It's a clean slate. I really want to thank my good friend Eric Ziwak for being part of our first episode, and I want to thank him and his band Etherbody for giving us their song What's Going On as our theme song. You can find their music on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, anywhere that you get your music. Their band is spelled AEther Body. It's a Latin letter AE. It's a little complicated. We're getting to the end zone here, so thank you for being part of my fantasy, and I will see you week 1.